So we decided that we're going to do a series of videos that address what we think are frequently asked questions. Right? So what's our first frequently asked question?
Can you still get a concealed carry permit in Missouri?
Yes, despite changes to the law in 2017, Missouri still has a concealed carry resident permit and a process outlined in the law to apply for the same. 30 states have a permitless carry system. I think a lot of what leads to the confusion are people that think they no longer need a permit because of constitutional carry verbiage that we often see.
So in Missouri, do we have constitutional carry or do we have permitless carry with restrictions?
I would say it's probably better termed as permitless carry with restrictions. In Missouri, you can't find the words. In the statute law, you cannot find the words that talk about constitutional carry or permitless carry. It's simply addressed in a one-line portion of statute law underneath the title of unlawful use of a firearm. They technically made it not illegal to carry a gun concealed in Missouri without a permit, with the exception of 17 restrictive to some degree places. So it actually kind of begs the question, why should someone still go through the permit process, the application portion of it, spend in Missouri it can't exceed $100, but spend that money and the time through the permit process?
I think the number one reason is education. A lot of people believe that you take the concealed carry class, they don't want the permit, but you take the class, which is separate than getting the permit. You have the education, you're a smarter consumer if you want to use the permitless carry in the state of Missouri. You still have the education, you're making more informed decisions.
The Missouri concealed carry courses are not self-defense training programs. It's a gateway instructional program designed and intended to be a safety course where a student or an applicant has to demonstrate safe gun handling skills and a basic understanding of the statute laws that govern self-defense and carrying a firearm. But yet, how many times have we heard people say, "Oh, my dad taught me, or my grandpa taught me everything I need to know about protecting myself and my family," which again is completely different from concealed carry or the concealed carry permitting process.
The concealed carry permit in the state of Missouri costs $100 for the initial permit and $50 for the renewal, correct?
Statute law says that it cannot exceed $100 with the exception of if they take a credit card payment. It's good for 5 years. And you're correct, the renewal fee is only $50 unique, not for every state, but different in Missouri. There's no requirement for follow-on training or additional training prior to renewing the permit. Of course, that's subject to change, like all statute law. And one of the reasons some of the states don't recognize Missouri's permit is because there's no additional training or refresher training.
Speaking of changes, one of the most common questions that I hear, do I still have to shoot a revolver and a semi-automatic in the class?
I believe it was a typographical error. I believe they accidentally said and instead of or. And for 12 years, I think, in Missouri, you had to shoot both a semi-auto and a revolver. Updated in 2017, now there's a 40-round requirement for one or the other, equally divided between practice and the actual qualification. We very firmly believe in the Second Amendment of the Constitution that the right to keep and bear arms cannot be infringed. But along with that right comes a great degree of responsibility, and we believe that training should be recent, relevant, and realistic.
That some states required refresher training to renew their concealed carry permits. Do you think that's important?
Firstly, I think that the permitting process is by and large the way states limit their liability as it relates to the individual. Um, but I think that they've ensured that they've limited that liability to some degree by requiring follow-on training or refresher training at some level. Every state again different. Missouri doesn't require that. I do, however, think that just like you said, I believe it's really important that we be educated, that we're making the most intelligent decisions possible as it relates to protecting ourselves and our family. So I think, like 2003 is when my permit, when I first got my Missouri permit, a lot has changed. Three different iterations of the law in that time frame. So I think the follow-on refresher training, as long as you find a valid instructor, you very thoroughly vet that training program, then a different insight and that follow-on education, I think, would be hugely critical, especially if the reason for getting the permit is actually to better protect yourself and your family. It shouldn't be mistaken. The Missouri concealed carry course is not a firearms training course. It's a safety course and the start of a certification process. There's a great deal of information that simply can't be covered in the time allowed for the Missouri concealed carry courses, like a proper presentation from a holster and the fundamental skills that should be required or should be essential skills if you're truly trying to protect yourself or your family better. So you chose the number one reason, and I know they weren't in numerical order, but the number one reason for getting the permit is from the education standpoint. I think one of the very critical reasons, maybe number one for me, but that probably shifts on a day to day basis. Those 17 restricted places, how often do we see the confusion surrounding where I can and where I can't?
Every day.
Yeah, like which ones?
Banks.
Banks. All the time. People come, oh, you can't carry in a bank. Oh, because it's federally insured. And they heard that. Again, they heard it from
Right.
dad, or they heard it from grandpa, or they heard it from that trusted authority figure that you're not allowed to carry in a bank. And banks aren't even referenced in Missouri statute law. People automatically, I think, every time in first place we would ask them about is a bar.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we always hear?
Oh, you can't carry in a bar. Period.
Because they think that since there's alcohol there, which now we're thinking, now there's some common sense involved, but it leads us right back around to the confusions associated with statute law because we just don't read it.
Another one that I hear quite often is schools.
And therein lies some of the confusion because there are federal statutes, there are state statutes, there's a degree of sovereignty between the states and the federal government that in part makes it a little bit confusing. But not only are schools one of the restricted places, they're one of the places that with permission, it no longer is restricted. There are some things associated with that. But it's the gateway. The permit is the gateway to being able to legally carry a firearm in a school or any of those 17 places.
And if I get permission from my preacher, I can carry in church if I have a permit or not, right?
It's so often we've seen in class for years we've laughed about, oh, my pastor said I could. Yeah, it's because the pastor doesn't understand the statute law and the fact that it's outlined underneath unlawful use of a firearm that without a permit I cannot carry in church. The permissions are technically a way around, once again, we're reducing liabilities, but they're technically a way around the liability concerns when we're starting to deal with private property. The 15th restricted place, by the way. And how often do we see signs that are not 11 by 14 inches with 1-inch block letters? Rather, we see that little square with a circle and a line through an image or a shadow of a firearm. And we're supposed to know that that means you can't carry a gun. Yeah, there's so many confusing things behind those restricted areas. But what's that one point we always bring out to the students? But of those 17, that one paragraph that makes
shall not be deemed criminal.
so Missouri recognizes all permits from every state, wherever it was issued, whenever it was issued, as long as it remains valid. And it specifically says that even if you carried it in one of those restricted places, it cannot be considered criminal. There could be some liability concerns. I might get banned. I might be told, don't ever come back to our establishment, but I've not committed a criminal offense inside of that. So I think that permit process actually serves to protect us, even if we didn't understand it completely from an educational side. I think it leads us down the correct path, at least in the state of Missouri.
Knowledge is power.
We believe that knowledge is power, and that knowledge comes from education. The training setting should be safe, welcoming, non-judgmental, and free of intimidation. A learning environment where everybody can learn, can get their questions answered. We believe in the fundamental right of self-defense, but along with that right, the inherent responsibility to better protect ourselves and our family is ours to bear. If you carry a firearm, personally or professionally, with or without a permit, as an initial response to a deadly force encounter, we believe that initial response should be a deliberate response, and a deliberate responder, when evil strikes, is prepared mentally and physically to respond without emotion, undue consideration, or reflection with an appropriate amount of force.